Hey everybody, this is Wild and Woolly Game coming to you live from Milvanore, the center of everywhere, to bring to you today the single most comprehensive review and should you buy video on the TA-154 premium German heavy fighter anywhere online. Seriously, I just do not think that you could get any more in depth and go over almost everything with this plane like I will be doing in this video. So in this video, I'll be going over its stats, win rates, how to play, what role it fills, pros and cons, how it compares to other heavy fighters / interceptors, and also regular single engine fighters, how it compares to the very few similar BR premium heavy fighters in the game, and also I will be giving you my recommendation as to whether or not you should purchase this beast of an aircraft. Hint, you probably should. Additionally, after the initial gameplay video shown in the background, I have plenty of objective tests that I filmed with this plane, from actual climb rate to acceleration tests, ground target damage tests, and even a wing breakage test. These will be showing in the background with captions as I speak about other important things with this plane, just so you can get the maximum amount of data. So like I said, this is the most comprehensive review for this plane anywhere. Before I begin, please press the subscribe button for more content. It keeps me motivated to make more, and it really shows me that you want me to continue making content of this or better quality in the future. Either way, without further ado, let's get started. So to start, let's go over its stats, and its most basic stat is its BR. So this is a 4.3 BR aircraft, except in simulator where it sits at 4.0 BR. Costs 1,450 Golden Eagles to purchase, unless you have some sort of discount, and it costs typically around 2,000 Silver Lions to repair. Its top speed is 659 kilometers per hour. It turns at 23 seconds for a full turn. You also have 16.1 meter per second climb rate. 10.02 kilogram per second burst coming from two MK108 30mm cannons and two MG151 20mm cannons. And of course, being that this is premium, you do have the RP and Silver Lion boosters that will vary depending on your preferred game mode with this plane. So that being said, its role is primarily as a bomber interceptor. Now, due to its good climb rate, good top speed, and really just incredibly heavy armament for its BR, this plane does not have any secondary weaponry such as bombs, rockets, or additional guns, so its versatility is somewhat limited and does not function all too well in the ground attack role. This is not to say that it is stuck solely hunting bombers, as it can be a competent dogfighter as well, just in the right hands. It has somewhat limited turn times, especially when compared to single engine fighters like the various Spitfires and early Mustangs that you might encounter, but it can largely outrun these planes in a dive. Now in a dogfight, it functions powerfully as a head-on machine, similarly to how you might eliminate a bomber early in game. Try to avoid confrontations with those really well-turning planes, such as British fighters, and if you play arcade, Japanese fighters, due to their likelihood of juking around your plane in a head-on and leaving you with a fighter almost instantly on your tail, firing and just shooting you down. So if you do not get the chance to complete a successful head-on, make sure to enter into a dogfight behind enemy planes, preferably from an elevated angle. Try not to jump into the middle of a melee, as the somewhat limited turning capabilities of the TA-154 may lead to your downfall. This said, standard boom and zoom tactics do apply and should make short work of most of your enemies and will account for a large portion of your kills, barring any prolonged engagement where this plane really begins to suffer. And so far as the stats are concerned for win rates, you have arcade, and this sits at 544 games played. It has a win rate of 64.98% out of those 544 games played. And out of those games, you have an average of 2.93 frags per match. Fairly remarkable, in my opinion. In realistic, and this is based on 853 games played, it has a 79.05% win rate with 2.66 frags per match. Simulator, this is only out of 16 games, has a 100% win rate with 2 frags per match on average. Especially if you look at realistic, you're talking a 4 out of 5 match win rate, which is truly remarkable. And this is all based on Thunder skill. So I don't know when the last time they updated it was, but still, that's a remarkable figure. And so far as pros are concerned, this is fast. It's typically actually faster than most planes of its BR, unless, of course, you might run to a Mustang or something similar to that. But insofar as heavy fighters are concerned, it is actually pretty fast. It's very well armed, even when comparing to heavy fighters. It's pretty sturdy. It's not insanely sturdy where you can just absorb damage left and right. However, it will take a fair amount of damage, and I would say is on the favorable side of average when it comes to sturdiness. It has a good climb rate, not incredible. It's not going to match most single-engine fighters, but it does do pretty well in that department. It's got a favorable BR. One might argue that this could be a 4.7 BR aircraft. It's got premium bonuses, as mentioned before. Personally, I think that this plane looks amazing, so this isn't as much of a pro for the plane, but I still think that it could bring someone to purchase this plane, which I would say is kind of a pro. It's twin engine, so the loss of one engine is not necessarily a death sentence, unless, of course, the second engine is incredibly heavily damaged, so you might not make it back, but you can limp back to base on one engine with this plane fairly easily. It has nose-mounted armaments, which means no need for gun conversions, which is amazing, especially for head-ons. It has a single rudder tail, which makes rudder maneuvers much more steady than twin boom or twin rudder planes. It actually has a fairly high ammo capacity. It's not insanely high, but it's pretty good, so that you won't really have to run out of ammo or reload fairly often. And it also has a good burst duration. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you have some other planes that can shoot lower amount of burst for shorter amounts of time, and that really gives us a big advantage, again, in the bomber role and even in the dogfighting role. For cons, I'd say its lack of versatility kind of leads the pack. It cannot engage most ground targets beyond those that are not very heavily armored or very lightly armored, I mean to say, or not armored at all. Turn rate is good for a heavy fighter, but still leaves you wanting if you're facing planes like the Spitfire, for example. Now, due to its interceptor role or heavy fighter role, you'll likely die early in the match, unfortunately, at least if the enemy has competent escort fighters. It's a large target, but you're still actually slightly smaller than other heavy fighters. There's no defensive armament, so unlike the ME-410 or even some BF planes, if I'm not mistaken, you will not have a way of defending yourself unless, of course, your frontal armaments are facing the enemy. Now, you have limited tactical options as well, so really you can just boom and zoom, and you might every now and again encounter a favorable plane to dogfight with, such as other heavy fighters or maybe a torpedo bomber or something strange. So how it compares to other heavy fighters, it's well armed even in the heavy fighter field, but still lacking in that versatility that most heavy fighters have. So by this point in the BR ratings, and really by this point, I guess you could say in the advancement of planes throughout World War II, whatever heavy fighters were still left tend to have the option of functioning as a ground attack or light bomber role. This plane does not. The TA-154 cannot do that. It takes the bomber hunter role to the extreme. For example, versus the ME-410 A1/U2, the TA-154 has 35 km/h higher top speed and realistic, almost 8 seconds lower of a turn time, 5.3 meter per second higher climb rate, and about 4 kilograms per second higher burst. And this is against a similar German heavy fighter. Versus the Beaufighter Mark 21, the differences are even more stark. The TA-154 has 139 km per second per hour, I mean to say, higher top speed, a 19.2 second lower turn time, 6 meters per second higher climb rate, and about 2.57 kilogram per second higher burst. As you can see, versus other heavy fighters, the TA-154 functions very favorably statistically, and it trades a lot of the versatility that those planes have for being an awesome pure heavy fighter / interceptor. Now, versus regular fighters, the results are a little bit different. It has significantly more armaments or more burst than most planes until you really start reaching the ME-262 and planes beyond that, primarily jets. and it will not match up well in a dogfight, but it's still pretty capable. So versus the Spitfire Mark 5C Tropical, the TA-154 has a 67 kilometer per hour higher top speed, 6.8 second higher turn time, 3.4 meters per second lower climb rate, and about 4.85 kilograms per second higher burst. So the Spitfire actually has a fairly high burst for what it is, but it still cannot match up with the TA-154. Now versus the P-51 Mustang D5, the TA-154 actually has a 39 kilometer per hour lower top speed, the same turn time, again according to the stat card, and 1.9 meters per second lower climb rate, and about 6.69 kilograms per second higher burst. So versus regular fighters, your success with the TA-154 will largely be a mixed bag, determined largely if you can make the first move and how successful that first move is. Once you have to face more than one single engine fighter at a time, your chances for survival become nil, largely because they can outturn you and you have no defensive countermeasures. So this plane has a few proper comparisons when it comes to a similar BR heavy fighters, but the KI-96, which is 3.7 to 4.0 BR, for a heavy fighter, premium heavy fighter, depending on your game mode, that plane actually has a slightly lower turn rate, according to the stat sheet, with a slightly higher climb rate and significantly lower top speed with a much lower burst compared to the TA-154. Now, for all these negatives, the KI-96 actually costs 150 Golden Eagles more than the TA-154, which is about 10% more for generally lower stats in the KI-96. Now, the English have the Whirlwind P9 at BR 3.7, but this plane is, you can't buy this plane for Golden Eagles. So you can either unlock it from a crate or purchase it from the marketplace. At current prices, it sits around $4.50 USD, which is around the equivalent of 700 to 800 Golden Eagles, which I would say is actually a bargain. Comparatively, it has a significantly lower top speed compared to the TA-154 and about the same turn rate and climb rate, which is fairly remarkable, especially being that it's a fair amount lower in BR compared to the TA-154. Again, with the Japanese premium heavy fighter, this has significantly lower burst damage at around half of that the TA-154 has, and it has the same burst, or has that burst damage coming through Hispano Mark I cannons, which are notoriously bad in War Thunder. Worst of all, these cannons don't come with anything beyond a 17% improvement beyond failures, which is entirely insufficient for anything more than a 3.5 second burst, and even that gets dicey. Your weapons can fail. This is in comparison to the TA-154, which can easily have 5+ second continuous fire, and with much heavier weaponry. I mean, in that same 3.5 seconds, you're putting out about 2 times as much burst, but if you really want to push it to the limits of each plane, I mean, you are putting out, about 140, like 130 to 150% as much firepower between failures of guns when you're talking about the Whirlwind compared to the TA-154. So the TA-154 just has a much better armament than the Whirlwind. So neither the KI-96 nor the Whirlwind P9 offer any additional loadout system, pretty similar to the TA-154. They're just gun-based planes. One thing to note, however, is that the KI-96 has a 37mm cannon, but that can only be fitted with HE ammunition. So you might find that to be a little bit fun, and maybe that's your drawing point to the plane, but it has no role outside of that to destroy planes. Now, for individual scores, I'd rate this plane as having the following. So for armament, I give it a 9.5 for its 4.3 BR. This plane carries some of the heaviest armaments for any plane until you reach jets, and even still, it's very heavy. On top of that, ammo capacity is fairly high. The only thing that I really feel that I could deduct points for is its lack of anti-ground weaponry. Otherwise, this is about the deadliest fighter that you can find for this BR. Its speed, I have to give it a 7 out of 10, and that's for a 4.3 BR. It's got really good speed, but its climb rate and agility leaves some things to be desired. And again, a lot of that lends to the fact that it is a heavy fighter, a twin-engine fighter. Versatility, I can only give it a 4. So while it can switch from interceptor to dogfighter when you need to, thanks in large part to its good turn rate and single rudder tail, it has almost no, it's just not a plane for ground attack. It carries no bombs, and unless you're shooting at a medium tank from the pure vertical, this will not shoot through anything beyond unarmored or very lightly armored ground vehicles. For ease of use / controls, I've given it a 7.5. Now, because planes are moving in 3 dimensions instead of just on a relatively flat plane like tanks and other ground vehicles, controls become incredibly important. Now, for this plane, I'd say it controls almost in between a heavy single-engine fighter, kind of like a Typhoon, / ground attacker, maybe even like an IL-2, Ilyushin 2, sorry if I mispronounced that, and your typical twin-engine heavy fighters like the Me-410. Now, it loses points in this category because of the rudder trying to shift too hard one way or the other to make up for any lateral changes in flight, and that can be pretty disruptive when you're trying to use this plane as a dogfighter, especially, or if you decide to as a ground attacker. Now, for fun factor, I have to give it an 8. So this plane can roll with really most BRs that it will encounter, but its lack of versatility takes a few points away. And, you know, as I'm sure most people think, versatility is a factor in how much fun this game can be, because if you're only ever flying one type of thing that can only do one thing at a time, it's not really all that fun, but it does it really, really well in that this is a really, really good bomber hunter. And it's really just fun to instantly knock out heavy bombers. Now, insofar as cost effectiveness is concerned, between the inexpensive golden eagle cost, cheap repair costs, and high yield from good matches, this plane is an absolute must-have for someone that wants a strong mid-BR fighter that can both intercept and dogfight. So I have to give it a 10 out of 10 for cost. Now, if you want a ground attacker, this is not the plane for you, but I will not factor that into this score, being that I'm just basing this purely on the role that it is intended to fill, and it fills it well. Now, final score, I give it a 46 out of 60, and that's a combination of all the scores I listed previously. So while this plane is not perfect, this plane does the role it was set out for and does it extremely well. Now, will you win most dogfights against Spitfires? No. Will you be the top ground attacker in this plane? Probably not, unless you're, for whatever reason, just eating up all the unarmored ground kills. What you will be, however, is a shield against all bombers heading to friendly targets, and that is worth so much in this game. And that's why I have to give it at least that 46, especially when you're considering its really inexpensive Golden Eagle price. It's give or take around, what, $9, I believe, in terms of USD, for Golden Eagle, I guess you could say, comparison. So is it worth it? As I'm sure that you guessed from the rest of this video, I'd say very much so. The shockingly low price of 1,450 Golden Eagles mixed with its extreme power against bombers at its BR makes this a plane that you should purchase regardless of if there is a sale going on or not. Though its stats sometimes feel a little bit inflated when you play it compared to how this plane truly performs, it is generally just a better heavy fighter than most other heavy fighters, regardless of BR, and is still somewhat competent as a dogfighter. Like with most fighters and heavy fighters, the success that you have with this plane will largely be dependent as to whether or not you get the first hit or you outright just get the kill. Regardless, if you have a need to kill bombers and don't care about much else in this game, this plane will be perfect for you. Even if you like to kill bombers part-time and then go after fighters, this plane still works. This is definitely a steal for the price that it costs. That being said, thank you so much for watching my video. Remember, like, comment, and subscribe, as it all means a ton to me. Either way, this is Wild and Woolly Gaming. Not saying goodnight, just saying. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you guys on the other side.